Hello, good evening, good day, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Ask Abhijit for the year 2023, the Gregorian year 2023. So, we're going to take a bunch of questions today. We're going to deal with some geopolitics, more history today, and maybe even some science, depending on how much time we have. I've selected a whole lot of questions, and let's see how many we can cover. And before we do that, let me see who all is there. Let me greet you all who's in the live chat. I can see The Guy, Anshul, Sushant, Arun, Melvin, Zamyate Sparker, Aditya, Samarth Acharya, Bante Gupta, Shekhar, CEO of Sigma Grindset, Mukal Manas, Fatty Just Ate, Tripti, Crazy Brain, Sanjay, Joe Stalin, Bhavna, Jay Dikshit, Victores Fortes, Anup Khitani, Sagar, Soviet Union, Arnav Agarwal, Noob Extreme, Konal Puri, Vassal of USA, Darshan, Vineet, Manmat, Anjana, Suhash, Adrish, Aditya Mishra, Unnati and Dugu Video, Sachin, Jongjina, Vikrant, Aditya, Pratik, Rishabh, Somnath Abhishek, Shreyansh, Abhay, Idli, Akshat, Aryan Sardesai, Albert Davis, Racy Lion, Durga M, GPSC Library, Asminor, Rustin Cole, Dev Patel, Vin, Om Prakash, Tanvi, Tourist Acceptable, Rakshasi, Raj, Physicist, hello, Ujwal, Alpha, Pratham, Sushant, Rita Singh, Zamyante, Urvesh, Aviral, Bhavna, Somalia, Sikh Nationalist, Bhavyadip Rathore, Atharva, Divyansh, Mr. Gigachar of India, Anup, Vineet, Soviet Union, father of Pakistan, Khushi Rani, Adrish, uh, and lots and other people. Vasal of USA, Aryaman, Somnath, Bunty, Karthik, Priyanshi, Mukul, and lots of people. Thank you all for being on this live stream. So let's get into the questions without any further ado. What are the questions? Let's see. Rohan says, did you achieve all your goals you decided to at the start of 2022? I did not achieve all of the goals I had thought of achieving at the start of 2022. And what's interesting is that I achieved certain things I had not even thought of achieving in 2022. So as see, the thing is, without a goal you can't score, as the cliche goes. So you need to have some goals, a set of goals, not too many, not too few, a certain set of goals, and then try to work towards that as much as you can. I obviously worked very, very hard. I did not take almost any time off. I wasn't slacking. I worked really hard. And when you do that, new opportunities come your way, and new achievements sometimes are unlocked, like they say in gaming. So I did not achieve all of the goals. See, when you start working towards a goal, towards a set of goals, over time you realize that certain you need to prioritize more, so some of them, so some maybe less, maybe keep some for later. That always works. That's how it always goes. So a set of goals is not something you necessarily have to achieve completely. It's good to have a set of goals to work towards, and when you do that, you may end up doing things that you had not even thought of doing. So that's somehow that's the kind of 2022 I had. I had a set of goals. I have achieved some of those. Some of those I have kept for later. I decided not to finish them in 2022 itself, and I ended up doing several things that I had not even thought of doing in 2022. Overall, 22 was a great year. Very happy with it, and I obviously have a set of goals for 2023, and I am sure that I will not achieve all of those, but I most likely will end up achieving something apart from that as well. That's how it typically goes, as long as you work really hard, as long as you're focused and you have a set of goals. So that's how it was for me. Let's take the next question. Ankit says, could you please share your views on the defense deal with Cyprus? What impact would it have from an international point of view? Alka says, what is the significance of India signing a defense agreement with Cyprus during Dr. Jaishankar's recent visit to the country? So let's see what Dr. Jaishankar and other people have to say about this. Uh, Let us see. Let's take a look at some tweets by Dr. Jaishankar. He says, great to meet President of House of Representatives Anita Demetriou. Interesting conversation on our parliamentary practices. Appreciate the presentation of commemorative stamps marking Amrit Mahotsav and 60 years of diplomatic ties, and some pictures that go along with that. So he met Madame Anita Demetriou, who's the President of the House of Representatives of Cyprus. What else does Dr. Jaishankar have to say? apart from that, Dr. Jaishankar says that he also met with foreign minister Ioannis Kasoulides in Nicosia, which is the capital of Cyprus. Cyprus. The third meeting this year, but this one in Cyprus. Comprehensive discussions on bilateral ties, cooperation in EU and other multilateral fora. Also exchanged perspectives on our neighborhood, Indo-Pacific, West Asia, and Ukraine. Yeah. What else happened? Let's take a look at what the lady has to say. This is in Greek, so let's translate that. Machine translation. In an extremely useful discussion with the Indian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dr. Jaishankar, we examined ways to further deepen bilateral relations and develop collaborations on critical issues: energy, migration, and climate crisis. We informed about Turkish provocations against Cyprus. Now, that's an interesting perspective. So there was a discussion about Turkish provocations against Cyprus. Yeah. Now let's take a look at Cyprus to understand the. If you don't understand the geography, you won't understand the geopolitics. So let's take a look at the geography of the region of the country, and that obviously informs us a lot. So we know where India is. Let's go westwards. Let's go to the Mediterranean, and in the Mediterranean, in the eastern Mediterranean, you have Turkey, and south of Turkey, there's this island called Cyprus. This is a divided island. In the 1970s, the Turks invaded the island and captured roughly the northern third or so of the island. Yeah, there is a line of control, as you can see, the dashed lines. The southern part is still Greek. Historically, it's always been Greek. Historically, even the region of Turkey has been Greek. Yep. So the island is under Turkish occupation right now. Yes, Nicosia is itself a divided city. As you can see, the dashed line passes right through the heart of Nicosia itself. Yes, so that's where Dr. Jaishankar went on his recent visit. Turkey occupies forcibly the northern, roughly one third of the island. Yes, so the agreements. I believe 3 agreements were signed between India and Cyprus. There was an agreement on defense and military cooperation, more like a memorandum of understanding. So India and Cyprus will now cooperate and collaborate from the defense and military perspective, which there are no more specifics available as of today. We know there's an MOU that has been signed between India and Cyprus, but the details of the agreement or the MOU, thus far as far as I've seen, have not been made specific or made public. So there's going to be, going forward, some kind of defense and military collaboration, cooperation between India. Maybe it could involve some arms sales, etc., from India to Cyprus, because India is a manufacturer of arms. Cyprus is not. Greece is not. So there could be some sales of weapons and weapon systems in the future, arms and all that. Maybe there could be visits by Indian naval ships to Cyprus in the future, and further we could explore further areas of cooperation. There was also a letter of intent that about migration and mobility that was signed between the two nations, which essentially will facilitate the mobility of students and business people and professionals and other people, maybe tourists also, between India and Cyprus. So Cyprus is a nice location in the Mediterranean Sea, nice beaches, great climate, all that. Yeah, so it's a nice place for Indians to go to, maybe as tourists, and maybe even as students if there are opportunities there. So there's some kind of agreement that's been signed about migration and mobility between India and Cyprus, which will essentially help the citizens of both nations. And apart from that, there's an agreement that's been signed, a framework agreement on the International Solar Alliance, which has been signed by Cyprus. The International Solar Alliance is an Indian idea. It's been started by India. India is the leader. So now Cyprus has been welcomed into the International Solar Alliance. So these are the 3 main things that have essentially been done, signed. Yeah. So it's a good step forward in India's relationship with Cyprus and India's overall global diplomacy. And I believe the two sides also discussed various things like the COVID-19 pandemic and food security, energy security, which again ties in with the solar alliance thing, and so on. So as of today, so what would obviously interest most of us, most people, would be the defense and military agreement that's been signed, whatever has been signed. But thus far, we don't have the details. As and when details become available, if they do, then we will speak about it. Uh, but yeah, the specifics have not been revealed. That is a good step overall. So we know that India and Turkey don't have the best relationship. India and Turkey have never had the best of relationships, right? Ever since the partitioning of India by the British, Turkey has more or less consistently taken the side of the Pakistanis. Yeah, and it's mostly been kind of, to some extent, anti-India, not very strongly anti-India in the sense of overt hostilities or any such thing. But yes, overall, their tone, their approach has been more pro-Pakistan and more anti-India. Uh, so so yeah, that's so in the light of that fact, this is a good thing that India has done. So it will put, in some way or the other, some kind of pressure on Turkey, and this could be the beginning of that. So before, as far as I know, India and Cyprus haven't had much of any kinds of dealings diplomatically, internationally, bilaterally, etc. So this is a great step forward, and if India and Cyprus sign a defense and military agreement, the Cypriots have just one main opponent, one main enemy, which is Turkey. Yeah, Turkey holds the northern third of the island, and they would like to take over the whole island eventually, if they are allowed to. So if India and Cyprus get into this relationship, it's going to strengthen Cyprus against the Turks. So essentially, this is an anti-Turkish move. That's how you could see it. And yeah, it serves the Turks well. And obviously, India now is a stronger and more confident world power. And we are seeing all of this as a consequence of that. So India is projecting its influence right now. It's diplomatically, to some extent militarily also. So we also have to counterbalance what the Turks may be doing in various parts of the world. Their attitude has always been anti-India. So this is you could say, a good counter to that, and it's also good for the Cypriots, who deserve to be free of Turkish occupation in their island. So yeah, that's what we know thus far of this agreement or deal or whatever it is between India and Cyprus. It's not a deal thus far, it's an agreement. It's a memorandum of understanding, which opens up a lot of possibilities for defense and military cooperation between the two nations in the future. All right, Khosrow says, can you talk about the Meiji restoration and why it happened and its outcomes, the lesser known Greek genocide, part of the broader Assyrian, Armenian, and Greek genocide, and my thoughts on the lore of the Lord of the Rings? Okay, look, I'll talk about one thing. Let's talk about the Meiji restoration. I have referred to the Meiji restoration on occasion, but we've never really discussed in as a separate topic. So I'll just throw some light over on it. I will not obviously give a detailed exposition, which would take a lot of time. But yeah, it's so Japan is one of the important nations. If you look at the history of the 19th and 20th centuries, Japan is a major power, major world power. Japan transformed itself into a major world power, military power, imperial power. It suffered defeat in the end of World War II, but then it became a US occupied territory, a US vassal state, and it was allowed to transform itself into a major technological and economic power until the 1980s. It's still a major technological power, but economically it's been kind of ruined. So it all kind of begins with the Meiji restoration. So I find Japanese history really fascinating. I would encourage all of you to, if you are so inclined, to read about it. So okay, let's put Japan on the screen, yes, so that we all know what we are talking about. So Japan, of course, we know it's a small nation, but it's had a very significant influence on global geopolitics in the past 100 plus years. So what was this Meiji Reformation? To understand the Meiji Reformation, you have to go back in time. You can't start with the day the Meiji Reformation starts. You have to go back in time to understand the context. So the Meiji Restoration was essentially something that happened in the late 1860s. It all begins with a coup d'état. Yeah, it was the overthrow of the feudal Tokugawa shogunate. So what was the Tokugawa shogunate? So if you go back 1,000 years before today, um, Japan entered what you could say the era of the shogunates. Yeah, the shoguns were the see, Japanese society was divided into various classes, very similar to Indian society. I mean, Indian society historically was, if you look at what Megasthenes said, the Greek ambassador to India 2,500 years ago, he said Indian society was divided into seven classes. And of late, we think of Indian society as divided into four classes or castes or whatever you want to call it. That's how the British that's the nomenclature they imposed, caste system. The Japanese had a very similar thing. So you had the warrior class, you had the merchant class, you had the agricultural class, and so on. Yeah. And you also had the administrators and officials and all that. And that's the kind of society Japan had, essentially of a fourfold division of society. So uh so about 1,000 years ago, the samurai, the warriors, became very dominant in Japanese society, and they established what you could call it happened this way, that the shogunate system was established. The shogun was the greatest power. One person who is at the head of the entire nation. It is not the emperor. The emperor was just a nominal emperor for all this time. Yeah, the emperor was essentially a figurehead, but the real power lay in the hands of the shogun, who was the ruler of the samurai and the entire nation, more or less. So technically, they were under the emperor, but actually they were the real power, the shoguns. So Japan was under this system for beginning about 1,000 or so years ago. Obviously, if you go back in time, there's a whole different story in Japan. There's a significant influence of Indian culture in Japan, which syncretized itself with the indigenous Shinto traditions. So the Indian culture that came into Japan came via China, and it's mostly what you would call Buddhist culture. But obviously, it is not just Buddhist culture. You had all the various Hindu divinities in this. Yeah. Um, so and Shinto is more like Japanese Hinduism. It emerged and evolved completely independently in Japan, but it's extremely similar to to Hinduism. There are more similarities between Shinto and Hinduism than between Hinduism and its offshoot Buddhism. Anyhow, that's a different story. So beginning 1,000 years ago, we have the shogunate system, more or less, in Japan. About half a millennium ago, you had the beginning of the European travelers starting to go across the world in their ships. They had acquired this new technology from wherever they acquired. We know where they acquired it from, and so on. So the Europeans began circumnavigating the world and trying to find out what lies in different parts of the world. And in the 18th and 19th century, they began to establish their dominance in Asia. We know what the Europeans did to India. We don't need to repeat that. They also overran China to some extent. We had the Opium Wars and all that. And with the beginning of the European influence in this region, the Tokugawa shogunate essentially closed off the nation of Japan, to outside forces. So Japan was essentially in complete they adopted a policy of isolating Japan from external influences. So they refused to allow European ships to dock in Japanese ports. The Tokugawa shogunate, they had seen the influence that Christianity brought into Japan. They observed that Japanese citizens who became Christians turned anti-national. That's what they observe. That's what they write. Okay, it's not my opinion. That's what they've written. So they banned the entry of Europeans into Japan. If you read European histories of Japan of this era, they will say there was large scale persecution of Christians. Yeah, that's what they claim, and so on. So for a couple of 100 years, for about 2 centuries, Japan was isolated. Japan adopted a policy of isolationism from the world. Then in the 19th century, the Americans started coming to Japan, and they refused to go away when they were ordered by the Tokugawa shogunate. They came in big ships with powerful guns, cannons, and all that. And when the Tokugawa forces would tell them to go away, they would refuse, and they would come and dock, and they would and I don't know what was the name of the American admiral, some Perry, William Perry or some Perry or something. He said that I will come back in 1 year, and you better give me a positive response, otherwise we can, we will not accept. your policy of isolationism. We want to trade with Japan, and Japan had resources like coal, other things that the Americans wanted, the Europeans wanted. So the Europeans wanted to trade with Japan, and so so the Tokugawa policy of isolationism was not going to work forever. And that's why in the 1860s, 1867, 68 or so, there was an overthrow of the Tokugawa shogunate. It was a coup d'etat, and it was a bunch of people who did that. And they propped up the Meiji emperor, who was a teenager, a young boy, as the emperor of Japan, and the Tokugawa shogunate was overthrown. This is a coup d'etat, and obviously it was not an easy process. There were rebellions for some time. The certain sections of the samurai cooperated. Then they realized that the samurai are being essentially wiped out of existence. All their uh, power, all their privileges are going to disappear. So there were rebellions. Yeah, so this goes on for about 2 decades, 2 3 decades almost. Yeah, the rebellions and all that. um, and the real power lay not with the Meiji emperor but with his cabinet. That's where the real power lay. The Meiji emperor was essentially a figurehead. uh, so even during the shogunate era, the emperor was a figurehead. Even during the Meiji restoration era, the emperor was more or less a figurehead. The real power lay with the cabinet. So then the shogunate was overthrown. The samurai rebelled. There were 2 or 3 rebellions of the samurai. These were eventually crushed, and a new kind of Japan was created, a constitutional uh, imperial state. uh, and the emphasis was uh, on importing western outlook, western technology. Yeah, but keeping some kind of balance, and preserving Japanese culture to some extent. Yeah. uh, and there was an attempt to stamp out Buddhism from Japan, which failed. But even today, as a consequence of that, the Japanese people now see Buddhism as an external religion, as something that came in from outside. Before that, it was not seen that way. So they attempted to stamp out Buddhism. That failed, but they brought in a very different outlook. They essentially, the samurai were crushed, and they no longer have any influence in Japanese society since then. Uh, and they adopted a very Western mindset. And from this point onwards, Japan becomes uh, an imperial power. So they very rapidly modernized. They very rapidly industrialized. They adopted universal education, which may not have been there before that. They adopted a system of conscription and a standing army, which became a very powerful army. Yeah. um, and the Japanese, in order to gain respect in the eyes of the West, started a policy of imperialism and colonialism. So they essentially started colonizing parts of eastern China, the Manchukuo region, what is now China, which historically has not been China. So the region east of Japan, they colonized parts of Korea, eventually all of Korea. Yeah, occupied that. They occupied Manchukuo as well, present day Manchuria, and they came into conflict with the Chinese and even with the Russians. So that's a whole story. But so that's what happened. That's what the Meiji Restoration was about. It was a coup d'etat which overthrew the old feudal system, the samurai system, the shogunate era, the Tokugawa shogunate. It brought in a huge wave of complete modernization of Japan and westernization of Japan. The army, this during the samurai era and the shogunate era, the warriors were very deeply uh, inculturated. They had this system called Bushido, which is the samurai code of honor. They were very honorable people. They had a very clear sense of ethics, what could be done, what could not be done. The samurai were for the longest time, eating meat was prohibited in Japan, and slaughter of cattle was prohibited in Japan. The samurai were great warriors, but they were mostly vegetarians. That's a strange thing. So all of that was thrown out of the window, and the new army that came into power was a very different force. It was a very westernized force. The influence of culture, of dharmic culture, of Shinto culture, all of that was taken out. Yeah. And the army was essentially a western style modern professional army, which followed the orders of the superiors unquestioningly. Yeah. And that is something that led to the horrific atrocities that Japan later on went on to perpetrate uh, during its era of expansionism, imperial expansionism, and colonialism. Yeah. So that is essentially what the Meiji restoration was, and the outcomes. So it transformed Japan within a couple of decades into an expansionist, colonialist, imperialist power that brought Japan respect in the eyes of the West. They said, the Westerners said that, oh my goodness, look at that. Japan is behaving like a civilized nation, just like us. So maybe that's the kind of thing that they wanted, you know. Uh, so yeah, so that's kind of what happened. That was what the Meiji restoration was about, and its outcomes. I will not discuss the other things because that will take too much time. But it's yeah. So that's what the Meiji restoration was about, and it totally transformed Japan. Eventually led to the defeat of Japan in World War II, and various other things as well. And what you see in Japan today is essentially a direct outcome of a process that was set in motion in the 1860s and 1870s, the Meiji restoration. Rudrajit says tensions between Russia and Japan are increasing day by day over the Kuril Islands. The Kuril Islands, as Russia and Japan both are very important for India's geopolitical, economical, and military interests. According to you, what should be India's stance on this issue? Interesting question. Um, so let's talk about the Kuril Island dispute. Yeah, um, that's a dispute that's been simmering for about, I don't know, 80 years. 80, almost 80 years. So let's talk about that. So I spoke about the Meiji restoration just a second ago. Yeah. So during the Meiji era, even during the Tokugawa shogunate era, uh, Japan had started expanding in various directions. Yeah, and one of the directions it expanded was in the north. So Japan had, I believe, this island, the island of Sakhalin, which is now a Russian island, was once a Japanese island. At least the southern half of the island was under Japanese control, and all of the Kuril Islands in the 19th century were under Japanese control. The Kuril Islands are this chain of islands, all right? This here in the middle of the screen is the northernmost Japanese main island of Hokkaido, and north of the island of Hokkaido, we have this island here, Sakhalin Island, and over here we have the various Kuril Islands. As you can see, it's written here, Kuril Islands. And this goes on all the way up to here until the Kamchatka Peninsula, which is a Russian peninsula. Now, in the 19th century, the Japanese and the Russians had various agreements. At one point in time, Japan and Russia had decided to share control over the Sakhalin Island. The northern half would be Russian, the southern half would be Japanese. Yeah, the Russians too had a policy of expansionism. Yeah, Russia, obviously, as we know, the capital has been Moscow, but they expanded eastwards. They also had this policy of settler colonialism, and this entire Eurasian landmass that is currently part of Russia was all conquered by the Russians. The peoples who live here are not Russian people. They are essentially uh, Tungusic people, Tuvan people, Siberian people who have Turkic ethnicity, Mongolic ethnicity, and so on. Yeah, in the north you have the Ainu people who live in this region, especially in the who have historically lived in the Kuril Islands. So, in the middle of the 19th century, the Russians and Japanese shared Sakhalin Island, and there was an agreement which said that Japan could essentially take control of all the Kuril Islands up to the tip of the Kamchatka Peninsula. Yeah. So this situation stood for a very long time. And then the Russians expanded eastwards. They took over Manchuria, and they also took control of the port city of Dalian, which is currently part of China, and they established a major port of Vladivostok, which is right north of North Korea. All right. Now, during the Second World War, Japan, as we know, fought the United States and the Western allies, and eventually in 1945, uh, Japan was defeated. Japan was made to surrender after the twin atomic tests on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yes. So a couple of days after the atomic test on Hiroshima, the Soviets and the Japanese had a non-aggression or some kind of agreement, which was due to expire in 1946. In 1946, But at the end of the war, just before Japan surrenders in 1945 itself, the Soviets launched an invasion of the Kuril Island chain, just 2 days after the atomic test on Hiroshima, the American atomic test on Hiroshima. So the Japanese were reeling from this disaster, and a couple of days, just a few days later, there was another test on Nagasaki, and a week after Hiroshima, the Japanese had to surrender. While this was happening, the Soviets, they broke the non-aggression pact, that whatever treaty they had, and illegally invaded the Kuril Islands. And the Kuril Islands, the inhabitants were all Japanese. So the Soviets very rapidly came all the way south up to these islands. What is this island called? Kunashir. What is this one called? It's called Zelioni. This one is called Shikotan, and so on. So all these islands were captured forcibly by the Soviets, and they expelled all the Japanese inhabitants and relocated them forcibly to the Japanese mainland. And then the Soviets settled Slavic peoples in these islands, in Sakhalin, in the Kuril Islands, mainly Russian and Ukrainian speakers. Yeah. So one could argue that the Soviet invasion of the Kuril Islands was illegal because they had this pact, this non-aggression or whatever pact it was, a peace pact, a peace treaty or whatever it was, which was supposed to last until 1946. So the Japanese they were defeated. The Soviets invaded these islands, etc. Then the Americans imposed certain treaties on the Japanese. The Japanese were forced to sign these treaties. One of these treaties says that the Japanese will relinquish all claims on the Kuril Islands. Yeah, that's one of the treaties, and various other things as well. As a consequence of all of these things that happened, the Japanese have always claimed that the Kuril Islands are the four Kuril Islands up to I believe the island of Urup. If not this one, then up to the island of Iturup. So they claim four Kuril Islands, and they said that these islands have been captured illegally by the Soviet Union, and now Russia is the continuation of the Soviet Union. And as a consequence of that, Japan and the USSR never signed a ceasefire, which means that technically World War II is still not over, because the ceasefire between Japan and the USSR was never signed, and the ceasefire between Japan and Russia has also never been signed. So the Soviets and now Russians, they have typically offered Japan control of two small islands. They said that we will offer you these two islands, and in exchange you need to relinquish your claims on all the other islands. And the Japanese have steadfastly refused. That's the situation in the Kuril Islands. Now, why is it that these islands are so important? Why is Russia hanging on to these islands, which seem to be small and unimportant? It's the same kind of question I get from some people, that what's the big deal about Nehru relinquishing Aksai Chin? What's the big deal? It's just a small piece of territory where nothing grows. That's the kind of silly argument some people make. So understand that every inch of territory has strategic value, and I'll show you why. So the Russians, the Soviet Union, and today Russia. See, earlier the Soviets had the Russians had access to Dalian port. Dalian is kind of to the south, which means that it doesn't freeze in the winter. If you see Vladivostok, the port of Vladivostok, which is the southernmost port in this region that the Russians have, it freezes in winter for at least 2 or 3 months. I don't remember how much, but it freezes totally. It's icebound in winter. So the Russian Pacific Fleet, it is based in the vicinity of Vladivostok. Yeah. So for the Russian Pacific Fleet to navigate the oceans, in winter it's quite difficult, and for this Russian Pacific Fleet, to go into the high seas of the Pacific Ocean, it has to go through several choke points. Let me show you what choke points exist. You have the island of Tsushima here. So there is the Korean Strait to the west of Tsushima. There is a different strait to the right, to the east of Tsushima. There is a small strait over here between these islands in Japan. So South Korea is militarily occupied by the US. Japan is under permanent military occupation, tens of thousands of US troops in both the nations. So these straits are under constant surveillance by the Americans. So anything that happens here, the Americans will know immediately. So if the Soviet or later Russian fleet were to try to go into the Pacific Ocean from here, the Americans will know exactly what's happening, and that's not an ideal situation. The other straight choke point is here between Hokkaido and uh, the main island of Japan. That also is obviously under constant US supervision. The other strait is between Sakhalin and Hokkaido, which is kind of something that the Russians can use. And then you have the Kuril Islands. Now, if the Kuril Islands were to go back into Japanese control, it means the Americans will immediately establish military bases there, and then they will be able to monitor everything the Russians are doing. Now, if you go to the northern Kuril Islands, these are very strongly icebound in winter. Even the southern Kuril Islands are icebound, but the northern islands are icebound for at least 2 months more. So that's why the Kuril Islands are strategically very important. If the Americans if the Japanese, which means the Americans, take control of these islands, then the entire Russian Pacific fleet will be totally hemmed in. It's like the island China, the island chains that the Chinese are so upset about. These island chains ring fence the Chinese navy, and the Americans are able to monitor everything the Chinese do as a consequence. Yeah. So that's why the Kuril Islands are so strategically important for the Russians. Of course, there's also the question of oil and gas. If you see Sakhalin, uh, the northeast part of Sakhalin offshore has very significant reserves of oil and natural gas. Yeah, very, very major reserves of oil and natural gas. It's possible that the Kuril Islands also may have significant reserves of oil and natural gas. So why should the Russians give that up? So that is the dispute. That's what the dispute is all about. And after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the Japanese have been upping the ante and making these noises that Kuril Islands is a disputed territory and we want it back. Obviously, at the instigation of the US. And I would say that i- if you look at the way history has unfolded, one could say that Japan has a very strong claim and a rightful claim on the Kuril Islands. But justice, there is no such thing as justice. Yeah, in geopolitics, whoever holds the islands is the rightful owner. That's how it goes. Might is right. So the Russians have military uh, a significant military presence on these islands. Yeah, they have anti-aircraft batteries. They have missiles that are installed over here, missile systems, um, troops as well over here. And there is a significant Russian and Ukrainian speaking population that has been settled in these islands. So the Russians are not going anywhere. They are not going to give up the claim, and they're not going to give up the islands. And there's not much the Japanese can do right now, as long as the Russians have the military strength and the capabilities to hold on to these islands. And these are very vital and strategically important islands for Russia. So why would they give it up? Now the question, so that's the Kuril Islands dispute. Now Russia and Japan both are important to India in various ways. What should India's stance be on the issue? India's stance should be, it's not our concern, it's not our business. Both nations should find a peaceful resolution to the debate, to the issue. You need to India would say that Japan and Russia should sit down and negotiate it and find a diplomatically negotiated solution to the disputed Kuril Islands issue. No war, please don't go to war. This is not an era for war. That's what we say. So that should be India's stance on this issue. Japan essentially is an extension of the US. It really, it's very unfortunate that the wonderful people of Japan are under foreign military occupation for the past almost 80 years. It's terrible for them. Yeah. But yeah, Japan as of today is an extension of the US. It's a US vassal state. It's under total, almost total permanent US military occupation. Um, so yes, Japan obviously has significant importance for India. Culturally, we have the very old relationship between India and Japan, and so culturally we are very much alike. Of course, Japan now doesn't have an independent foreign or military policy, so whatever they do is essentially what the Americans tell them to do. So that's how it is. So India should stay out of these. these disputes. It's not India's business. We should exhort both sides to refrain from any warmongering, any violence, and both sides need to sit down at the negotiating table and find a negotiated settlement or solution uh, to this dispute. That should be India's official position on the matter. Mazhar says, you always say that Germany, Japan, and to some extent Italy are under permanent US military occupation. Then why don't we see Germany or Japan's footballers or other renowned figures showing resentment about their country's occupation by a foreign power? Why is it so? You know, there is this very famous Korean rapper called Psy, the guy who sang Gangnam Style. It emerged after, so he released this song called Gangnam Style. It's become a phenomenon, maybe the most viewed video on YouTube, billions plus views and all that. He became a global phenomenon. And then it emerged that about 15 or so, I don't know, a decade or so ago, he had made anti-US statements on the record. He's South Korean, and he was made to publicly apologize for this and express regret for what he had said. Yeah. So it's not like people don't know. The current chancellor of Germany, Mr. Olaf Scholz, as a student, had participated in anti-US protests. But today he's a good boy, and that's why he has been appointed. He has changed his opinion. He is now reformed, and he now has been allowed to ascend to the top position in Germany, which only happens with the assent of the imperial overlord, which is the United States. So it's not like no one knows about this, but you cannot make too much of a noise about this if you know what is best for you in these nations. And mostly what happens, like about a year or so ago, I spoke about Arminius. Arminius uh, was a German freedom fighter. That time there was no Germany. There were the various Germanic tribes or clans that lived in what is now Germany, and they were under the Roman yoke, under Roman occupation. This guy Arminius was the son of the chieftain of the Cherusci or some tribe. Yes. And he was taken hostage by the Romans, and he was brought up as a Roman prince, as a Roman, as part of the Roman nobility. So it was assumed by the Romans that he would be loyal to to Rome. So he was given charge of a major. He rose in the military ranks, and then he was deputed to Germany as part of the Roman occupying forces. He switched sides, and he defected to his people. He raised he kind of unified certain coalitions. He created a unified coalition of various Germanic tribes. He taught them the Roman way of warfare. He understood how the Roman war machine worked. And in the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, which happened, I think, in 9 or 8 AD, in the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, the Germans under Arminius were able to annihilate 3 Roman legions. And this set off a chain of events that within 2 centuries would end uh, in the decline and destruction of the Western Roman Empire. Yeah, it took a couple of centuries, but after this event, things started changing gradually. So Arminius is the first great German freedom fighter, you could say. He fought against imperial occupation, and he should be a major figure in Germany. But and in the year 2009 or whatever it was, or 2012, I don't remember which year, you can look it up. That was the 2000th anniversary of the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, in which the Germans defeated the Romans. And yet almost nobody celebrated this in Germany. Why? Because this was not taught at the time in Germany's history textbooks. So if you are taught lies, you will not know what's happening. You will not know what's happening. Yeah. Germany's constitution has been written under US supervision. I'm not sure how many Germans know this. It all depends on what you're taught. Whatever you're taught as a kid, you hold on to that emotionally. And and later, if somebody tells you something else, you will react emotionally and say you're wrong. You're telling lies. For the longest time in India, children were taught that the Mughals, the Turkic occupiers of India, the brutal barbarians who bled India for 700 years, we were taught that these Mughals were the greatest saviors of India, and they were good for India. Akbar was great, and so on. Even today, if you tell a kid or a young person that Akbar was actually a brutal killer, then they will accuse you of trying to rewrite history and all that. So it doesn't matter what's happening, as long as the overall narrative is that your nation is free and all that, then people will not know about it. All you have to do is to have a certain kind of narrative that is propagated through the education system, and the same narrative should also be reinforced by the leaders of the nation and by the media. And the media in Japan is controlled, in South Korea and Germany is controlled by pro-Western forces, and the leaders are Western puppets. So what do you expect? Yeah, even in Pakistan, I I know for a fact that Pakistani textbooks glorify and eulogize uh, brutal barbarians like Ghori and Ghaznavi, yeah, who did so much harm to the ancestors of the Pakistani people, and yet today's Pakistanis consider them to be like next to God, yeah, the Ghori and Ghaznavi. So that's how it is. That's how it goes. The power of propaganda, the power of misleading people and distorting history through the education system, through the media, and through your leaders. That's how it goes. So that's why you don't see any of this happening. Some people know about it, but they are suppressed and marginalized. That's how it goes. Unfortunate. Daniel Nicholson says, "Could you please enlighten us about the secret nuclear city at Challakere in Chitradurga district? Why was the West so alarmed by its construction in the not so distant past?" Interesting question you ask. Yes, interesting question. Let's take a look. Let me put that on the screen. What is the whole deal about the secret nuclear city in Challakere? So this is an article from which year is this? This is December 16, 2015, right? This is about 7 years ago. Whatever it is, 6, 7, 8 years, 6, 7 years ago. India is building a top secret nuclear city to produce thermonuclear weapons, experts say. These weapons could upgrade India as a nuclear power and deeply unsettle Pakistan and China. So, what's your problem, foreign policy? It's a US publication. Yeah. Uh, so, that's a whole long story about this. Yeah. And they speak about various Indians who are against this, local villagers who have been evicted apparently from their lands and all that. uh, it also kind of reveals certain Indian insiders who are working against the interests of India, who are working against the Indian government. Let me show you an example. There is this person called Leo Saldana, founding member of some advocacy organization, who writes about how how tribal communities and local farming communities are being walled off and so on. These are all lies. There are lots of aspiring Zelenskys within India who are very happy to help foreign forces undermine India's national interests. Yeah. So in this article, this place is being portrayed as a future uh, nuclear city, a top secret nuclear city to produce thermonuclear weapons. Right. So that's what the West was apparently so alarmed about. They don't want India to make any progress. Obviously, we know that. So what exactly is going on in Challakere? Let's take a look. Yeah. Because see, yeah, okay, let me put that on the screen. So first of all, please understand, I am showing you information that's available in the public domain. I'm not showing you any secret or sensitive information. Anybody who has access to the internet can see this. Okay, so I'm not showing you anything, any classified information. Let's take a look at Chalakere. Where is it? So let's locate this on the map. It's in Karnataka, in peninsular India, in southern India. Yes. So let's go to the town, the region of Chalakere. What's going on here? Let's put the satellite view on the screen, and very soon you will know what's happening here. So north west of Chalakere, we have the Chitradurga Aeronautical Test Range. Zoom into it, you will see that there's this place. As you can see, there's a runway, and there are some DRDO facilities over here. Yeah. So that's what it is. So this was not a secret nuclear city. They were building an aeronautical test range, and this is information that anybody can see. So I'm not showing anything classified or secret or sensitive. All right, this is all out in the open. Let's just briefly take a look at how long this runway is from tip to tip. It's about 2.87 kilometers long. So it's a reasonably long runway, and there's a shorter. I don't know. There's just one runway over here. So essentially, this is a place where you can, where the DRDO, etc., the Indian government and the DRDO, they most likely would be testing experimental aircraft and so on. I believe the DRDO Ghatak was tested over here, possibly, if I am not mistaken. Yeah. So this is where India tests. This is one of the places where India tests aircraft that are under development. That's what it is. It's not a secret nuclear city as was being alleged by the West. And why was the West so alarmed? Because they don't want India to make any progress of any kind. They want India to remain a mediocre, middling, unambitious, zero future third world nation. They don't want India to become a major world power, but unfortunately, it's not working for them. Yeah. So that's what the Challakere secret nuclear city or whatever was about. It was not a nuclear city. It's already become an aeronautical test range. That's what it is. Samad says, what would be Tajikistan's role in case of India-China war, considering the fact that India has air bases in Tajikistan? China also has a dispute with Tajikistan. Yes, China also has a dispute with Tajikistan. Let's once again go to the map to understand what is happening. Give me a second. All right, let's put that on the map. Once again, where's the map? Where's the map? Here's the map. Here's the map. All right. So in case some of you may not be aware, one second, let me do this again. Yes, here we are. The map. So in case some of you are not aware, Tajikistan is almost India's neighboring country. Yeah. As you can see, so some of this territory is currently temporarily, illegally occupied by Pakistan. Gilgit-Baltistan, Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir. But right across the Wakhan corridor of Afghanistan, we have the nation of Tajikistan, which is very close to India. It is adjacent to Afghanistan and very close to Pakistan. Now, what air bases are we referring to? There are two. One is Aini Air Base. Let's see where it is. Zoom in. Boom. There we are. So let's see. Let's orient ourselves. As you can see, it is in the western part of Tajikistan. If you can see it, yeah. As you can see, India is over here, not far away. Afghanistan, Kabul is not far, and Pakistan is not far. So let's now zoom in and see what kind of information we can see visually. See the satellite view. There we are. So this is a reasonably long and significant, reasonably respectable airbase. Let's see the length of the runway tip to tip. Oh wow, 3.23 kilometers. That is extensive. Yeah. And if we zoom in, see, once again, I'm not showing anything that is secret. This is all open source information. Anybody can see this. So there are various installations. You can see a whole bunch of helicopters. These look like Russian-made MIL helicopters. There are attack helicopters also, apparently. Yeah, we're not sure which one, what model it is. Yeah, interesting helicopters. This looks like an Indian Dhruva helicopter, if I am not mistaken. Yeah, and there are these aircraft over here. These look like Sukhois of some kind. These clearly are swing wing aircraft. So this is the airbase, one of the air bases we are talking about. It is jointly operated by India and Tajikistan, which is the other airbase. The other one is called Farkhor airbase. Let's see where that is. So once again, let's orient ourselves first by zooming out. So this is closer to the Afghan border and closer to Pakistan. Now let's zoom in and see what Farkhor airbase looks like. So this doesn't look like much. We don't see a proper runway. I don't know from when this image was taken, and you don't see any aircraft either. Anyhow, this airbase is also said to be jointly operated by India and Tajikistan. Now let's go back to Aini, all right? 1 second, and see the distance. Aini airbase, and we'll zoom out. So I want to see the distance between Aini airbase and let us say Rawalpindi. Where is our Rawalpindi? So let's take a bird's eye distance, measure distance. It's about 680 kilometers, straight line. Now we know it is said that at Aini airbase we have a number of Indian Sukhoi 30 MKI fighter planes and various other assets of ours, aerial assets, air force assets. So these two air bases, Farkhor and Aini, are not aimed at China. the intention is to the objective is not China, it is Pakistan. The straight line distance from Aini to Rawalpindi is 680 kilometers. The Sukhoi 30 has a capability of Mach 2 speed, twice the speed of sound. But let's say it's cruising at Mach 1.5. Let's say, yeah. Um, if you if you calculate, that's about 23 kilometers per minute. So within a matter of minutes, the Sukhois could be close to Rawalpindi. And actually, the Sukhois don't even need to be over Pakistani territory. They just need to overfly Afghanistan and launch missiles if need be. So the Indian air bases in Tajikistan are not aimed at China, they are aimed at Pakistan. And like you say, Tajikistan has not Tajikistan, China has a border dispute with Tajikistan. And Google obviously always shows this. It shows a dashed line, which kind of confirms China's claims on Tajikistani territory. Google somehow is very accommodative of Chinese perceptions, even though Google is banned in China. Very surprising, don't you see? Don't you say? Um, so the question is, what would be Tajikistan's role in India-China war, considering that India has air bases in Tajikistan? Tajikistan's role in a potential future India-China war would be that of, this is not my concern. This is not my problem. This is not my business. It's not my responsibility. Tajikistan will want to stay out of this. Yeah, because China is right next door to Tajikistan, and they don't want to feel the Chinese wrath. This entire situation of the two Indian air bases in Tajikistan is entirely aimed at Pakistan. Yeah, in a matter of minutes, India can send air force assets close to Pakistan, or if required, deep within Pakistani territory. So that's what it is about. There are no major Chinese targets near Tajikistan. I mean, Kashgar, Khotan, Aksu, etc., are not major military installations. The military installations that we are interested in with respect to China are the ones in Tibet, Lhasa and Shigatse Airport, in Yingchi, and so on. Yeah, the Chinese have military assets and installations in Tibet, close to India, the India Tibet and Nepal Tibet borders. These are the ones that concern us. These are very far away from the Indian Air Force bases in Tajikistan. So the Tajikistan air bases are entirely focused on Pakistan. That's what it is. Okay, Kaustubh says, in your Indian interest video, you said that from the Ukraine conflict, India should learn and focus more on drone technology and missile systems. We should focus on cyber warfare, but we are still waiting to induct even one indigenous drone. Meanwhile, Turkey and Iran are drone export leaders. What can we learn from these two nations? Excellent question. So yeah, let's not go back into the lessons of the Ukraine war. I said that we need to focus on drone technology. No, you don't develop drone technology over a matter of 6 months or 2 years. Take some time for these technologies to iteratively mature. You have to start from scratch, essentially. Yeah, and then you slowly build on whatever you've learned, and you make better and better drones. There are several generations of drones. Look at the generations of Indian missiles. We started with a very, very basic and very primitive, rudimentary Prithvi 1 missile, which is a liquid fueled missile. Now it is being replaced by the Agni P missile or so something. Yeah, so India started deploying indigenous missiles in the early 1990s. Now we are in the 2020s. The missiles that we are now deploying are incredibly sophisticated compared to those primitive missiles that we had. It took 30, 40 years for the missile program and technology in India to really mature and become very sophisticated. India has a very sophisticated missile, ballistic missile, and other missile program today. Ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and all. And there are certain missiles that we may not even be aware of. Yeah, so it took about 40 years for the program to become really cutting edge and very sophisticated. The same goes for India's space program. We started with very rudimentary rockets. Now we have some of the best rocket technology in the world. Yes. So when it comes to drones, let's talk about Turkey, right? You're referring to Turkey. We also refer to Iran. Let's take the example of Turkey. Yeah. So the Turks are now one of the leaders in drone technology. So they have this company called Baykar, which manufactures a bunch of drones. Baykar is a private Turkish defense technology. Now, once again, statutory warning: Wikipedia is not always reliable. I'm just using it for convenience. especially when it comes to history. It's not reliable. So this company was founded, Baykar, in 1984 as Baykar Makina, yeah, by Özdemir Bayraktar. It was founded in 1984. In And so it's been around for a long time, and they have a strong foundation and background in uh, precision machinery and all these things, automotive, constructing automotive parts, engines, pumps, and spare parts. So they have a very strong understanding of foundation in this mechanical engineering. Now, in the early 2000s, the son of Özdemir Bayraktar, Selçuk, he was studying in MIT, I believe. Yeah, no, he was in. He completed his masters in MIT, etc. So he returned to Turkey in 2007, cutting his PhD studies short, and he started developing drone technology. So the company already had a very strong foundation in mechanical engineering and all these things. And this guy came back in 2007 to work with his daddy, with his father, and within 5 years they started developing very uh, capable drones. Then his brother, younger brother, or I don't know, or his brother Haluk also joined the company. And so essentially, the company had a very strong foundation in mechanical engineering. From 2007 onwards, they started focusing on drones. And today, in 2023, they have some of the best drones in the world. Let's take a look at some of the drones that they have. Let's put that on the screen. So it takes time to mature. You iteratively mature this. So they have Bayraktar Mini UAV, the TB1, the TB2, the Akinci, the TB3, and the Kizilelma. Uh, so that's the drone family that they have. Let's take a look at the TB2, which is one of the more sophisticated drones that they have. It's being used in Ukraine and other places. Yes. So this took them a lot of time to develop this kind of drone. Yeah. So that is the TB2, which is one of the best drones they have. And now they are developing the red apple, the Kizilelma. The Kizilelma, we don't see images of that right now. Let's try to Google some images of the Kizilelma. This is a drone that is still under development. It incorporates some elements of stealth technology. You can see from the shape that it is stealth capable to a certain extent. So it's taken them decades to reach this position. It's not something you can do in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. Yeah, it takes time. You need a strong foundation of technology to be able to do this. Even the Chinese have a whole lot of drones they've been developing for the past 30, 40, 50 years. They have been testing all kinds of drones for decades. India has only now started focusing on drone technology. It takes time for this to develop and mature. We need to pour in substantial funds into this, and it's wrong to have. I mean, it's fine. See, in Turkey, there's just one company that's doing this. In China, there are a lot of different institutes that are working on drone technology. We need to have funds, and we need to have the right minds. You have to attract the right minds, and then build on whatever you've learned. So it takes time. I would say it would take India about 5 to 10 years to develop a stealth capable drone. We already are developing a stealth drone, flying wing drone called the DRDO Ghatak. It was earlier called the Aura. We have certain other projects under development. I think that India can accelerate the production of these technologies. We have DRDO, we have various. See, DRDO is a very bureaucratic organization. It's not a private company. Baykar is a private company. It's run specifically for a certain purpose. DRDO is a very sprawling organization. We certainly need to reform the way these organizations are run, cut down on all the extraneous staff. DRDO has a staff of how much? 30,000, out of which only 5,000 are scientists. So what are 25,000 non-scientists doing in DRDO? It's a huge drain of money. So we need to do something about this. We need to reform these organizations, maybe bring in the private sector. I think the brains, the talent, the capability, the know-how, it's all there in India. We need to find ways of leveraging that. um, so either the government should give out contracts to private, and we know that India is now becoming a drone hub. Private companies are manufacturing drones, not necessarily military drones, but the know-how they acquire in manufacturing commercial drones and developing the technology will definitely have military applications. So we are now building the capability to do these things, I think within a decade, India could very surprisingly become a nation at the forefront of some of these technologies. So, what we can learn from nations that have done well in designing and developing drone technology is that we have to invest in this technology for a long period of time. We have to attract the best minds. We have to provide sufficient funds, and we have to understand that there are several generations of technology which are built on top of the previous generations. So that's the thing. So I think now India is going in the right direction. Obviously we can still do better, we can still do much better, but we are on the right track now. I think within a decade India could be one of the major drone manufacturing nations, not just commercial drones but actually military drones as well. Yeah. Daniel says, how long will it take for the Indian military industrial complex to mature? What other products and services could India export and achieve absolute monopoly on so as to become a civilizational giant? Well, military technology has nothing to do with being. Well, yeah, of course, it all goes hand in hand. You cannot become a strong civilization without having a powerful military industrial complex, which of course lends itself to you becoming an imperial power as well. But yeah, so how long will it take for the Indian military industrial complex to mature? Well, when it comes to certain sectors, it's already very greatly matured. When it comes to rocket technology, as in ISRO, it's definitely matured. It's been there for a long time. I think India has the capability within the next 5 years to develop uh, uh, the kind of rockets that SpaceX has. SpaceX, I think the first rocket flight was in 2006 or 2007, if I'm not mistaken. And in just 15 or so years, they've become, they are launching rockets almost every week. And they have already developed one of the most powerful rockets the world has ever seen, the Falcon, whatever it is. Yeah, the mothership or whatever. I think India has the ability and the know-how in ISRO to, within the next 5 years, to develop a rocket of that caliber. We have it. We just lack the funding. We just lack the political will for that. Uh, so when it comes to ISRO and space technology, rocket technology, I think we are already at a very mature phase. When it comes to missile technology, we are already extremely mature. When it comes to fighter aircraft technology, we are intermediate at an intermediate step. We have now developed a fully world class light combat aircraft. We still don't have, as far as we know, the mm, the jet engine technology, as far as we know. So now we are at an intermediate stage. Once we have the Tejas Mark II and the AMCA, which would take a decade, then we will be at a more mature phase. So I think India is about a decade away from becoming a sophisticated and mature aircraft manufacturer. When it comes to other technologies like submarines and all, I think we already have production lines that we can leverage. Certain things we'll have to learn on our own. So I would say that instead of buying, we already have developed a nuclear submarine of our own, a whole class of nuclear submarines. We are able to build aircraft carriers on our own. So in various domains, we have various differing degrees of maturity. I think within a decade or so, India could be a very mature, could have a very mature military industrial complex. There are certain things India can manufacture on its own, like howitzers and whatnot. So yeah, we need to bring in the private companies into this, the private sector into this. There is so much capacity available in the private sector. So that's something that needs to be leveraged. I think within a decade, we could have a very mature military industrial complex, and we could become a major exporter of these things. We are already exporting weapons to Azerbaijan. We may be exporting the BrahMos missile to various nations. Various nations are interested. We are already exporting helicopters to various nations. We Even the LCA Tejas was in contention in various places, but certain strings were pulled at some places, and other South Korean light combat aircraft won at the end of the day. This is more political than actually based on your capabilities. So India needs to first start manufacturing all of its own weapons for its own purposes. Once you can do that, you can start exporting things. So I think we are about a decade or so away. So I'm very optimistic about this. Right. Akhand Bharat says, How can I learn Sanskrit if I can't read or write Hindi? I live in Australia. Never needed to learn Hindi. And what makes Sanskrit such an excellent programming language? Why is it so similar to Greek and Latin? And how did people thousands of years ago formulate such a meticulously crafted language that is perfect for computers today? Also, what religious texts should I read if I haven't read any? And what is the best English translations? Okay, let's. There are lots of questions in here. Let's talk about Sanskrit. Yeah, how can I learn Sanskrit if I can't read or write Hindi? Well, Sanskrit, the Sanskrit is a language, and the medium in which it is written is now the script. The Devanagari script. In the past, it was written in various other scripts, most likely the Sindhu Saraswati script, then the Brahmi script, then also the Kharashtra script, then the Sharda script. Lots and lots of scripts have been used to write Sanskrit. Today, the primary script is the Devanagari script. So, if you want to learn Sanskrit, you need to learn the Devanagari script. You can do it in 4 hours, and then you practice for a week. You'll become very comfortable with the Devanagari script. There's no big deal. Learning a script is no big deal. I remember as a kid, as a college kid, I remember one day I had nothing to do. I was bored. I picked out a dictionary that I don't have here. It's called the American Heritage Dictionary. I went to a random page. It opened on the Arabic script, and I decided to learn the Arabic script. And within a couple of hours, I was able to start writing my name and other things in the Arabic script. I now don't remember much of it, yeah, because I haven't bothered to practice. I think you can learn any script in a matter of hours, yeah, especially one that is intrinsically your own. It's part of your heritage. So you need to learn the Devanagari script. It will take you just a matter of hours, and with that you can start learning Sanskrit. Now the question is, what makes Sanskrit such an excellent programming language? Well, Sanskrit is not a programming language. A programming language has a very limited lexicon. It needs a very limited number of characters. Yeah, Sanskrit is not a programming language. It is not an excellent programming language. The thing about Sanskrit is that it is a very logical language. It's almost algorithmic in nature. It has what we call a completely formulated grammar, which is the Ashtadhyayi of Panini. No other natural language has this, and it's the only example of a generative grammar. Yeah, it's the only example among all the natural languages that is has a generative grammar, in contrast to other languages which have a descriptive grammar, right? So that's the difference between Sanskrit and other languages. Sanskrit is a very logical. It has a very logical algorithmic grammar. It has a generative grammar. No other language has. So a generative grammar is one in which, on the basis of your very well established lexicon and a set of very specific rules, the grammar can generate all acceptable expressions of the language, and only those expressions of the language which are acceptable. Yeah, so that is the thing about Sanskrit. It's got what we call the Shabda Bodh, a systematic method of analyzing the meaning of any sentence. Yeah, so that's why we call Sanskrit a very it's like a programming language, but it's not. Okay, it's a natural language. It doesn't quite have a context specific grammar. The thing in machine translate, see, these days we have Google Translate, which is a machine translation. We translate from a source language to a target language. Yeah, the most challenging application of natural language processing, which is machine translation of source language to target language, is the logic, the algorithm that we use. So when you have descriptive grammars, it's very hard, and that's why you see lots of times that Google Translate doesn't do a very good job. But when you have a completely formulated grammar, a generative grammar, then it becomes trivial for a machine translation system to translate accurately. Only Sanskrit has that, and that is something. And the works of Panini are the foundation of all linguistics today. Panini, even in the West, is recognized as the father of linguistics. So that is the reason why many people believe that Sanskrit is an excellent programming language. No, it's not. Sanskrit cannot be used as a programming language. Of course, you can use Sanskrit expressions and terms in a programming language instead of your Latin script that you use in let's say Python. In Python syntax, you could use Devanagari script and Sanskrit words in that. You could use that. That's quite easy to do. Yeah, but it's not a programming language. But it's an extremely logical language. It's perfectly logical, 100% logical. There is no ambiguity. Yeah, Shabdabodh, the systematic method of analyzing and of parsing a language, a sentence, and analyzing the precise meaning of the sentence that only Sanskrit has. So that's why people say that people have the belief that Sanskrit is a wonderful programming language. It is not quite that, but it is the most scientific, the most algorithmic, the most precise language out there, with the most superior grammar, if you want to say, if you want to call it that. Yeah. Is it very similar to Greek and Latin? No, it's not. Greek and Latin have, I mean, we have a whole bunch of languages which are called the Indo-European language family. Sanskrit is the oldest of them all. So yeah, all of these languages share some similarities with Sanskrit. But if you speak Greek, it doesn't mean you will be able to understand any Sanskrit at all. Yeah, not necessarily, or Latin. And Greek and Latin aren't as precise as Sanskrit, right? Like I said, the Sanskrit has a completely formulated grammar and a generative grammar. Greek and Latin don't have that. So these are all languages that all emerged out of the old language, which may have been pre-Vedic Sanskrit. Yeah, but it is the classical Sanskrit of Panini that has these characteristics that no other language in human knowledge, in existence, or in world history have. That's why we call Sanskrit Deva Bhasha, perhaps the language of the gods. Yeah. Okay, Saurabh says, in Ayodhya Kaand of Ramayana, there is a mention of the river Saraswati as one of the rivers that were crossed by Bharat in his journey from Kaikeyi to Ayodhya. So, can we say that Ramayana is older than 2000 BC, as this was the time when the great river Saraswati dried up? The Ramayana is definitely older than 2000 BC. So, in the Ramayana, there are mentions of the Saraswati, like you mentioned, like you say, and in the Mahabharata also there are mentions of the river Saraswati. We know that the Saraswati dried out about 1500 or so BC. Most of it dried out by that time, 1500 BC. That's 3,500 years before today. We also know that the river Saraswati started declining in strength, in intensity, in power, in volume after about 5000 BC. So the Indian monsoon used to be really heavy in the past. But beginning about 5000 BC, the Indian monsoon started declining gradually and monotonically. Gradual, slow decline. Yeah. Over centuries, over thousands of years. So the river was last in her prime around 7000 years before today. And she mostly dried out by about 3,500 years before today. So this is a period of about 3,500 years in which it went from a full-fledged great river to a river that is half dried out or mostly dried out. Yeah. Now, in the Ramayana, the Saraswati is mentioned as a great river. She is not mentioned as a river that is in decline or a river that is drying out, which means that the Ramayana was written closer to 7,000 years before today. It was written closer to, I don't know what the date is. I forget. I think it's 6000 BC, which means 8000 years before today. So the Ramayana was written closer to that time when the river was in her prime. It was not written closer to 1500 BC when the river was mostly dried out, which means the Ramayana is definitely way older than 2000 BC. The Ramayana could have been, the events of the Ramayana could have happened maybe somewhere around 5000, maybe 6000 BC. Quite likely. Yeah. But we don't have the correct dates as of now. It will happen in the future. We will get the dates. Right now, there's a lot of contention, confusion, a lot of all that. Yeah. So we'll not go into that controversy. When it comes to the Mahabharata, it clearly mentions, the text clearly mentions the Saraswati as a river that is declining, that is in the process of drying out, which means the Mahabharata was written closer to 1500 BC, but before 1500 BC. Yeah, we don't know the exact dates. It could have been 300 3000 BC when the Mahabharata happened. Could have been something else. We don't know quite what the date is. Various people have proposed various dates, and they are very strongly adamant that my date is correct, everybody else is wrong. I am not getting into the controversy. I have not ever gone on record say that this date is correct or that date is correct. So I have not taken any sides in this. But yeah, to answer your question, the Ramayana is way older than 2000 BC, way before that. Saurabh again. Sometimes I wonder about the ancient kings who lived during the Harappan times across India, and maybe some of our kings conquered Western lands, but unfortunately, we don't have any documents. Yeah, most of our documents are gone, burned in the destruction of our great libraries, Takshashila, Nalanda, Tilhara, Vikramashila, Sharda Peeth, and so on and so forth. We have lost all of that information, but we still have the texts of the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, etc., in which, especially in the Mahabharata, there are mentions of extensive, of many cities. There are lots of descriptions of pilgrimages and travels and journeys across India. There are descriptions of military campaigns, and there are mentions of many kingdoms and cities. Yeah, so it would be interesting to try to glean out, parse out some descriptive geographical information, and then try to match it from what we see from the various abandoned cities of that era that we do have on the map. I'm sure nobody has bothered or tried to do this seriously, especially from an academic perspective. I am sure that if professors of history or academicians were to try to do this and spend a few years doing this, I'm sure a lot of correlations could be found between the descriptions in these ancient texts and the cities that we do know exist in an abandoned form on the map, right? The various explored and unexplored archaeological sites that we know exist, the thousands of them that do exist. I'm sure that if we do a proper, detailed, systematic study, we could be able to start correlating some of these places and putting actual names on these cities that just exist as dots on the map. We don't even know what is the original name of Mohenjo-daro or Harappa or Rakhigarhi or Birana. These are names that have been given after the 19th and 20th century. Yeah, Mohenjo-daro means the mound of the dead, apparently. Uh, Harappa, I don't know what it means, but yeah, these are Sindhi names and so on. So we don't even know the true names of these places, what the people of that time called those great cities. I think if we do a proper systematic investigation, yeah, using the best minds that we have at our disposal, or some of the best minds, we could be able to find some actual, put some names on some of the cities. And if we are able to identify some of the cities with their actual names, we may even be able to know which kings at some point ruled over there, and so on. It certainly can be done. It's just that our historians have never bothered to do this because they are busy doing something else. Okay, bruh says, why is the Indus Valley civilization often portrayed as a very egalitarian and non-violent society? Good question. There are plenty of evidences of usage of bronze weapons in the Indus Valley. How can we derive the conclusion that lack of grandiose architecture and equal symmetrical buildings suggests that it was peaceful and egalitarian? Pretty weak evidence, in my opinion. Is this a conclusion by British archaeologists, a consequence of communist revolution in Russia during the 1920s, which had presented a very tasteful narrative of equality? Okay, so Bra says, see, let's analyze this logically. Bra says that there is the evidence that we have is pretty weak in his opinion, or her opinion, that the Saraswati Sindhu civilization was egalitarian and non-violent. Okay, let's have an open mind and be open to the possibility that maybe it was not egalitarian and it was maybe very violent, or maybe there was some violence. Yeah, so let's ask ourselves logically, are there any other examples in the archaeological record of civilizations or cultures that have been known to be inegalitarian and violent? Yeah, so many. Lots and lots of such examples. Egypt is an example. Rome is an example. The Yamnaya invasion of Europe. There are so many examples in history. There are almost no examples of non-violent societies. Almost all societies in the archaeological record are known to be violent. So then you ask yourself, what are the characteristics of a violent society? You see evidence in the archaeological record of warfare, of battles, of massacres. You see that everywhere. You see arrowheads strewn around in a battlefield. You go to Hisarlik in Turkey, in Anatolia, and you will see that the city of Hisarlik has elements, has sections, uh, chronological. If you look at the sedimentary history, yeah, the stratigraphic history, then you will see sections that there is soot and ash, and you will find lots of evidence of deaths and arrowheads and broken swords and shields and all that. You go to ancient England, you will see very clear evidence in the archaeological record of the Viking invasions. Yeah, there are these mass graves that you find where all the bones are in one place and all the skulls are in a different place, which is clear evidence of executions by decapitation. Yeah, so we know what violent societies look like in the archaeological record. Yes, that is very that is not weak evidence. That is conclusive evidence. Do you find any of that evidence anywhere in the geographical range of the Saraswati Sindhu civilization? You find not one example of that. Do you call this weak evidence? I know that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. We know that the people of the Saraswati Sindhu region and era had armies. How do we know this? We know this because of the records of King Rimush of Akkad. He fought a war against the people of Illam and Marhashi, and he records that the kingdoms of Illam and Marhashi had a military alliance with the people of Meluha. Meluha is Saraswati Sindhu, and there were soldiers from Meluha who participated in this war on the side of the people of Marhashi and Illam against the Akkadians. So, despite finding no evidence of warfare in the Saraswati Sindhu region for thousands of years in the archaeological record, we know they had soldiers. We know that they fought in wars and geopolitical events outside of India, outside of the Indian subcontinent. But we find absolutely not a single shred of evidence of warfare or violence in any of the Saraswati Sindhu archaeological sites. In the future, we may find something. Thus far, we have found nothing. I think that is extraordinarily strong evidence. Yeah. Egalitarianism. Okay. What about inequality and all that? We love to see inequality in India, right? What are examples of unequal societies? Unequal societies have, in an unequal society, most of the society's resources are controlled by a very small minority of the population. The aristocracy, the nobility, whatever you want to call it, right? The warlords, the kings, the emperors. You see, and we know Europe has always been like this. We know that Rome was like that. We know that Egypt was like this, and so on. We know many other cultures that have been like this. And in all of these unequal societies and cultures, we find very specific characteristics of inequality. We find great palaces and palaces that are built by the rulers to keep the lower classes away, and obviously invaders away also. Um, we see examples of monumental architecture like the pyramids. The pyramids don't serve any social purpose. They serve the purpose of glorifying the kings and raising them to the status of gods. In the case of medieval Europe, ancient Europe, we had the great palaces and forts and castles that showed off the status of these people as way above everybody else. Do you see any of these things in the Saraswati Sindhu region in that period of history, the so-called Harappan era or Indus Valley era? You see none of that. You see none of that. It's very clear. Over here, it's not even absence of evidence. There's just nothing of that kind. And all the great buildings serve social purposes that serve the entire society. The greatest buildings are meeting halls. The largest buildings are meeting halls or communal baths or grain storage facilities and all that, which serve the society and the common people. So once again, I think it's very strong evidence of a more egalitarian society than what you see elsewhere. So that's what I have to say about this. Obviously, you can believe whatever you like, that is fine, but we are talking logic here. We're not talking emotions. We are having this conversation on the basis of the evidence that is available to us here in the Saraswati Sindhu region and outside in the rest of the world. There's a very clear contradistinction in the kind of evidence we have in the archaeological record, which is why even the West says that the so-called Harappan civilization was almost utopian, no evidence of warfare, no evidence of class divides, all that. Even they claim it. Even they have to say it. So that's where we are. Rudrajit says, You always say that once the Central Asian people considered India to be their ancestral home and adored and followed Indian culture, but then how and when did they start considering India a foreign place and attacked India countless times? Thank you. See, yes, I have said this because we know it was so. Uttara Kuru and Uttara Madra. So, and even in 19th century German maps, you see the name Uttara Kuru and Uttara Madra. Yeah, Uttara Kuru was present day Tibet and Xinjiang, temporarily occupied by China. That was Uttara Kuru, north of the Himalayas, north of the actual Kuru Mahajanapada in India. And Central Asia, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, all of that, Uzbekistan, all of that was called Uttara Madra. These were all, we know it from the archaeological record and other sources, that these kingdoms which resided in these places were all Indian origin kingdoms. We all know that. It is, you read in history textbooks of that, and if you look at the history of that period, it's more or less agreed. Yeah. Now, so what happened? So these are not Central Asian peoples. These were Indian origin people who had gone out of India through wave after wave of migrations. Yeah, and some of them became nomadic. We call them the Saka people, the Shaka people. The West calls them Scythians. In Uttara Kuru, we had the Tushara people and other people who are called the Tokharians. Yeah. So what happened is the question. What happened is there were migrations from other places. So the Huns emerged out of uh, eastern Eurasia, north of China, north of Mongolia, more or less the region of Mongolia. They were called, the Chinese called them the Xiongnu. They became a warlike people. They overwhelmed everybody else, which forced the Kushans, the descendants of the Tushara people, and the Scythians, the Shaka people, to migrate westwards and southwards into India, which gave us the Scythian uh, invasion of India and the Kushan invasion of India, and they all assimilated harmoniously because they were of Indian origin, the same culture, essentially the same people. Now the Huns took over Central Asia. They established their own supremacy. They were a whole different ethnicity. The Huns were a different ethnicity. Let's put the map on because so that we understand what's happening. Where is the map? We're looking at Aini airbase. Let's give me a second. Let's see the map to understand this better. So we have India. We know where it is. Yeah, present day Tibet and so-called Xinjiang was Uttara Kuru, and Central Asia, which is north of Afghanistan, which is Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Azerbaijan, all that was Uttara Madra. Now, the Huns, they emerged out of most likely east of Mongolia or Mongolia itself, present day Mongolia. At that time, it was not called Mongolia, right? And they started sweeping across Central Asia. So the Kushans invaded India. They were actually fleeing from the Huns, and then they established an empire in India, and over time they assimilated into the Indian population. The Scythians also assimilated into the Indian population. So did the Indo-Greeks. Now, so these Indian origin kingdoms in Central Asia were replaced by Hunnic kingdoms, right? And the ethnicity also got mixed because the Huns were now the overlords of most of Central Asia, and there would be intermixing of the Indian origin people and the Hunnic people in Central Asia. Then you had the Huns eventually they reached Europe. They also invaded India, parts of India. We know that the Hunnic invasions of India, the Shweta Hunas, and then you had the Turkic supremacy over Central Asia. So the Turks most likely were of Hunnic origin, but they became Islamized, and then there were new waves of invasions, and they destroyed the Indian origin heritage of Central Asia. You will see ruins of Hindu temples and Buddhist stupas and monasteries all across Central Asia. Some of them have been replaced by uh, religious structures of the religion of the Turks. Yeah, but all of that was replaced, and the Turks were again a different ethnicity. They killed off most of the men of the original inhabitants of Central Asia, and they took the women as slaves, and that gave rise to a mixed race of people who now inhabit Central Asia and who have no connection anymore to Indian culture. That's why they started attacking India, and that's the history. That's how it goes. So if you look at the people of Central Asia today, they may have a little bit of Indian ancestry, But if you look at the population of Central Asia 2000 years ago, they would have 80% Indian ancestry. That's what happened. So Indian ancestry was wiped out to a significant extent, and Indian culture was almost entirely wiped out from Central Asia. It's more about culture than DNA. Always remember, always remember, culture matters, DNA doesn't matter. Yeah, that is what happened. Okay, Rudrajit again. We know that in ancient times, many Indians went to Southeast Asia for trade and intermarried with the natives there and established many Indianized kingdoms. Can you name some of those kingdoms and share some of their history? Okay, I'll just give a couple of names because otherwise you can have a 6-month university level course on this. Not 6 months, you can have a 2-year course on this. It's extremely detailed history, very interesting history. Yeah. So let's take a look at some of that. Once again, I'm going to put Wikipedia on the screen. As always, please understand, please realize Wikipedia is not necessarily reliable, especially when it comes to Indian history. But I am just putting it on the screen for the sake of convenience, for the sake of giving a very brief overview. One of the kingdoms we are talking about was Funan. Okay, Funan was in southern Vietnam, southern Cambodia, the ancestors essentially of the Khmer people. So Funan kingdom was one of these. It was an Indianized state, a network of states, or a mandala located in mainland Southeast Asia. So Funan goes back to about 2000 years before today. The first queen or the first ruler of Funan was Queen Soma. She is claimed to be the first monarch of Cambodia. She was the consort, the wife of Kondinya. Kondinya was an Indian person. An Indian merchant ship was attacked by pirates led by Soma, the daughter of the chieftain of the local Naga clan. The entire story is there. You can read it up if you want. So who was Kondinya? Let's take a look at who Kondinya was. He was the second monarch of Funan. He was the husband of Queen Soma. And he was from Odisha. He was from Kalinga. We call it Odisha today. So we know that that Kalinga had extensive and very ancient trade relations with Southeast Asia, at least for the past 3,000 years. Even 3,000 years ago, merchants and sailors from Kalinga, from eastern India, were traveling by ship across the present day, what's now called the Bay of Bengal, the Kalinga Sagar, into Southeast Asia and trading there. So one of these people was a merchant, apparently a Brahmin from Kalinga, and he went to this place, present day Cambodia and Vietnam. He married the local princess, Princess Soma, the Queen Soma, and they gave rise to the Funan kingdom. This is about 2,000 years before today, right? So that's the story of Funan kingdom. The successor state of Funan was called Chenla. The Chinese call it Chenla. This was again Hindu, yeah. And the successor of that essentially is the kingdom of Champa. That again goes back almost 2,000 years. It was in existence from 192 AD to 1832 AD, almost 1900 years, almost 2000 years roughly, yeah, give or take. And the what is now called the South China Sea was historically called the Champa Sagar, Champa Samudra, the Sea of Champa, the Champa Sea. Yeah. So the kingdom or empire of Champa was again an Indianized, Hinduized kingdom. Yeah. A mostly Shaivite kingdom. You will find lots of Shiva temples in this region. Then you obviously cannot neglect to talk about Java, Indonesia. Java again has a 2,000 plus year old Indian Hindu history. The main island was Yavadweep, and you had so many of these rulers: Deva Varman, Purna Varman, Jaya Bhupati, Prabhu Maharaja Vangsa, Queen Shima. So their culture was very much Indian. They had queens, they had kings. Women could also become the ruler of the country, just as in India. In other cultures, you will never see that. Yeah. And the Shailendra dynasty was a very significant dynasty. Yeah. It still rules Srivijaya in Sumatra, and so much. It's a very extensive history. It's almost impossible to talk about it in just a few minutes. There are so many kingdoms and so many dynasties. The Majapahit Empire was the imperial phase of of Indonesia. It was a Hindu phase, obviously. It was the greatest. It was the most glorious phase of Indonesia's history. They still remember that with great fondness, and they consider, the people of Indonesia consider that to be the pinnacle of Indonesian history, and so on. So there's a whole, it's an enormous amount of history to unpack. There's a good book by R.C. Majumdar, I believe, an old book, but that throws a lot of light on the Indianized kingdoms. He calls it colonies or whatever, for whatever reason. He wrote this in a different era when they thought about everything as a colony. But yeah, those were Indianized kingdoms. Those were not colonies of India in Southeast Asia. And of course, this extends way beyond Southeast Asia. Even the Philippines had Indianized kingdoms. Some of their kings had Chola ancestry. Yeah, and this continued until the Portuguese destruction of the Philippines and their culture, and then the Philippines were Christianized forcibly by the Portuguese. So you had Indian culture all across Southeast Asia, all the way to the Philippines, and of course in 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 Thailand, in Burma. Uh, Thailand and Burma were called Suvarna Bhumi even 2,500 years before today. Yeah, and of course in China, in Korea, all the way up to Japan, and of course westwards also. Very, very, very detailed and involved history. But I hope I've thrown a little bit of light on this and evoked hopefully some curiosity from those of you who are interested in this. So look it up. Check out R.C. Majumdar's book on this period of Southeast Asian history, and there are lots of online articles also that you can use for reading more about this. Samrat says Buddha was born in Nepal, sir. Look, if you want to say that Buddha was born in Nepal, have you heard of Hannibal? Hannibal Barca? Hannibal Barca was a Carthaginian general, uh, and he fought against Rome very successfully, may I say. So Hannibal was from Carthage. Where is Carthage found today? The ruins of Carthage are found near the present-day city of Tunis. You can see Carthage here. It's all ruins. The Romans destroyed Carthage eventually. Yeah, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. So that happened afterwards. But Hannibal Barca was one of the greatest generals of Carthage. He invaded Rome. Yeah, Rome, present day Italy, very successfully. So you could claim, from that perspective, you could claim that Hannibal was Tunisian. Would it be accurate to claim that Hannibal was Tunisian because Carthage is located in present day Tunisia? It's ridiculous to say that Hannibal Barca was Tunisian. Yeah, that's wrong. And similarly, it's kind of ridiculous to, not kind of, it's very ridiculous to say that Lord Karna of the Mahabharata era was a Bangladeshi. Yes, he ruled over Bangladesh, which is now uh, West Bengal and Bangladesh, historical Bengal. But is it right to call Lord Karna a Bangladeshi or a Bengali? Is it? It's not. Similarly, the present day nation state of Nepal originates in the kingdom of Nepal, which goes back to the times of Prithvi Narayan Shah. So when did he live? 1700s, I believe. So Prithvi, let me Google it. I don't remember dates, please. Okay, so don't mind it. Prithvi Narayan Shah. When did he live? 1700s. So he established the kingdom of Nevar, which is now called Nepal. That's just 300 or so years ago. There was no Nepal before that. The region always existed. It was always part of various kingdoms, of Indian kingdoms and Indian empires. It was part of the Kushan Empire. It was part of the Mauryan Empire. It was part of various other empires. It was part of the Gupta Empire as well. And so many empires. It was part of various Mahajanapadas of India. It was always Indian. There was no Nepal before the 1700s. The nation state, the kingdom of Nepal originates in the conquests of Prithvi Narayan Shah in that small region in the 1700s. Before that, there was no concept of a kingdom of Nepal, and the nation state of Nepal came much later. So, just like Hannibal Barca was not Tunisian, just like King Karna of the Mahabharata era was not Bangladeshi, similarly, Lord Buddha was not Nepalese. Of course, many of you may not agree. That's fine. Logic and emotions are whole two different things. and they should not be mixed. But well, there we go. Science. Karan says, how does a black hole evaporate, and where does it evaporate, and why does it evaporate? See, black holes have temperature. A black hole has a temperature. It's called the Hawking temperature. And any object that has a temperature which is hot, any hot object radiates. It radiates. So black holes radiate black body radiation. They radiate particles that and radiation that form the black body spectrum. And the temperature of a black hole, it's called the Hawking temperature. And because of the temperature, there is a certain rate at which a black hole emits radiation. The hotter the black hole is, the faster it emits radiation. And the smaller a black hole is, the hotter it is. Yeah. So there is a certain rate at which a black hole emits radiation. It's proportional to the inverse of the square of the mass of the black hole. 1 upon m squared, proportional to 1 upon m squared. M is the mass of the black hole. So the smaller a black hole, the faster it emits radiation. And this is called evaporation. So that's how it happens. Now, what's inside a black hole, we don't quite know. We can construct a theoretical black hole from the perspective of quantum mechanics by approximating a black hole as a bag of, let's say, photons. You can even construct a black hole as a bag of strings, a fuzzball, whatever, and you can play around with the math. But black holes evaporate because they are hot, they have a temperature. The smaller a black hole is, the hotter it is, and the faster it evaporates or emits radiation, and eventually it explodes into nothingness. And where does it evaporate? It evaporates right where it is. Assuming it's a Schwarzschild non-rotating black hole, it's going to be completely spherical. It's going to evaporate, which means emit radiation all around its surroundings, and it will go outwards. That's how it goes. Yeah. The madman says, can a collision of two neutron stars create gravitational waves? How are the gravitational waves even detected? A collision of anything creates gravitational waves. So when two neutron stars collide, they're going to give rise to not gravitational waves, but a gravitational tsunami, an enormous gravitational wave. When two black holes collide, they're going to give rise to a gravitational wave tsunami. It's not a small wave. It's a huge tsunami, enormous wave with an enormous amplitude. Yeah, and even when there's a black hole versus neutron star collision, there is a gravitational wave or tsunami that is emitted. Even when I punch my palm with my fist that way, that's going to give off gravitational waves. But those are going to be very small, tiny ripples in the fabric of space-time. When I do this, it just emits incredibly small ripples in the fabric of space-time. But when two enormous, massive objects collide, it creates a huge tsunami in the fabric of space-time. And today, the gravitational wave detectors that we have are only able to detect enormous tsunamis. They can't detect small ripples in the fabric of space-time. So how are gravitational waves detected? The instrument that we have is called LIGO. Soon an Indian version of LIGO is going to come up. It's going to be called Indigo. What is LIGO like? LIGO essentially is a Michelson interferometer. Let me put that on the screen, what that is. Let's quickly do this. LIGO essentially is an enormous Michelson interferometer. That's what it is. So it has two arms which are at right angles to each other. This is the essential schematic. Yeah, and the arms are very long, several kilometers long. Yeah, and the light is crossed, and if there is if the two paths are in the distance between the two of the lengths of the two arms are exactly equal. Yeah, and if a gravitational wave is incident on this apparatus, then there's going to be torsion. It's going to twist the fabric of space-time, and then the consequence of that is that the lengths of the two arms become unequal, and that's going to give rise to interference fringes in the laser light that is being split and then recombined. Yeah, so that is the basic the basic construction of the LIGO interferometer. So LIGO is extremely sensitive. It can detect a very small change. It can detect a change in the distance between its mirrors, which is about 1/10,000th of the width of a proton. A proton is a subatomic particle which is found inside most atoms, inside all atoms. Sorry, yeah, even the hydrogen atom has a nucleus which is a proton. So the LIGO detector can detect a change in distance between its mirrors, which which is as small as 1/10,000th the width of a proton, which is equivalent to measuring the distance between Earth and the nearest star, Alpha Centauri, which is about 4.2 light years away, measuring the distance to an accuracy smaller than the width of a human hair. So that's the kind of thing it is. And that's why we are able to detect gravitational waves. I believe about 90 or so gravitational waves have been detected thus far, and there are various runs that LIGO goes through. Thus far, we have detected about 90 or so. The first one was, I believe, in 2015, and that was a momentous occasion in the history of experimental physics. Right? Rodrajit, lots of questions by our friend Rodrajit. I have noticed that nowadays people are showing so much attraction for Chinese, Korean, and Japanese culture, but people don't seem to be much interested or attracted to Indian culture, which has a huge impact on the previous mentioned cultures. Which has had a huge impact on these other cultures that you have mentioned. Yeah, it's what's your take on this? Yeah, it's true. Um, why are people showing so much? Well, why are people so attracted? It's because of the media. It's because of the entertainment industry. It's because of Hollywood, and then Indian entertainment copies Hollywood. That's what Indian entertainment does. If you look at all the various entertainment shows like Indian Idol or whatever, they are copying shows that were started in the West. Indian Idol is a knockoff of American Idol. Indian music today is a knockoff of American music or Western music. A.R. Rahman in the 1990s started using electronic instruments and copying Western music, and Indians thought it's a very huge innovation. And then Bollywood started copying that, and today you don't have any Indian instruments or Indian styles left in Bollywood and mainstream music anymore. This was all started by A.R. Rahman by aping Western music by using electronic instruments which were imported from the West, and 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 much of the influence comes from Hollywood. Now, Hollywood is very. I think I've said this before. See, if you look various Hollywood, if you watch various Hollywood movies, they will glorify and celebrate cultures from across the world. Take a look at various Pixar movies like Moana, for instance. Moana celebrates Polynesian culture. If you watch the Pixar or Disney movie, I don't know which it is, Coco, which came recently, it celebrates indigenous Mexican Aztec culture, the Day of the Dead, yeah, Dio de Muertos or whatever it is. If you watch Aladdin, it celebrates Arabic culture. If you watch Mulan, it celebrates Chinese culture. If you watch the latest Mummy movie, The Mummy, it celebrates Chinese culture. The original Mummy movie celebrates Egyptian culture. The Wakanda movie celebrates African culture. Uh, if you watch Avatar, the first Avatar movie, it celebrates to an extent Native American culture, indigenous culture. If you watch movies like The Last of the Mohicans, the Dances with Wolves, it celebrates Native American culture. In 1972, there was a meeting between President Nixon of the US and Mao, the dictator of China. And Mao and Nixon decided to open up China to American investment and to American influence. The next year, Enter the Dragon was released, and Chinese culture became a hit in the West. Yeah. If you watch shows like Silicon Valley, there's this character called Dinesh, who's one of the main characters in Silicon Valley. He's depicted as a Pakistani. Yeah, not Indian. If you watch movies like Thor, Love and Summer, Love and Thunder, something, you have all the gods in the world who are depicted in this one scene, the pantheon of gods from across the world, but no Indian gods. And they show Zeus and Thor as separate gods when actually they are the same god. And of course, we have the celebration of Japanese culture, Japanese anime, manga. We have the celebration of K-pop in the Western world, but you never see any celebration of Indian culture ever. Why is that? Because all the other cultures that are celebrated are defeated cultures. These are cultures that have been defeated by the West. In 1972, they started considering China also to be a defeated culture because China was forced to open up to the US because they were facing great threats from the USSR. Yeah, dating back to the 1960s. So they see China as a defeated culture, and of course there's a lot of money to be made from China. So they celebrate Chinese culture, and all the other cultures I specified are all cultures the West considers to be defeated cultures. It's only India that has thus far not been defeated in the past 1000 years. Indian culture has refused to die. That's why they refuse to celebrate Indian culture. Any depiction of Indian culture 1960s onwards is going to be negative in the West, if it is at all ever depicted. And what's funny is that there are many people in the West who practice what you could call Hinduism. Yeah, but they are always depicted as Buddhists. Take the example of Tina Turner. She is depicted as a Buddhist. Take the example of Steve Jobs. You go to Wikipedia and search for Steve Jobs, they're going to portray him as a Buddhist. They will say he practiced Zen Buddhism. Do you know that when Steve Jobs died, he had a picture of the Indian Hindu guru Neem Karoli Baba on his bedstead. Bedstead. He had a blanket of Neem Karoli Baba with him, and he had a book called Miracle of Love, which is a collection of stories and teachings about Neem Karoli Baba, right next to him when he died. So clearly, he was influenced by a Hindu guru, and he believed in what we call Hinduism, and yet he is depicted as a Buddhist. Yeah, uh, so that's how it is. It's big. There is a blanket whitewashing and omission of any representation of Indian culture in Western media, in the Western entertainment world. Complete blanket deletion, right? They just don't show it, or if they show it in a very negative manner. Slumdog, whatever the movie was, extremely negative portrayal of India. If you look at the news, it's all negative. Any mention of Indian culture is negative. There is this festival in northern India, in Nepal, I believe, in which they slaughter buffaloes, and maybe in one day they slaughter maybe a few thousand buffaloes. So that is portrayed as incredibly barbaric. Do you know how many millions or billions of cattle are slaughtered in an extremely inhumane way in North America? What is the ritual sacrifice of 5,000 buffaloes compared to that? And yet they portray this as extremely primitive and barbaric, but what the West does is beautiful. So these are the reasons why, because of the complete absence of any depiction or representation of Indian culture in the entertainment industry and media, and whatever is there is negative. That's why people are now, they now feel, especially in India, that Indian culture is inferior, is primitive. They are ashamed of speaking about Indian culture. Then they try to copy the West, to imitate the West. And that's why they are very attracted to whatever is shown in a positive light, like Chinese culture or Korean culture or Japanese culture or whatever else. It is brainwashing through suggestion. Yeah, that's how it is. And today you see, yeah, okay, let's not go there. That's enough. All right, what else shall we take? Daniel says, which countries have the right to mine lunar minerals and metals? Do nations with lunar missions have exclusive rights to those things, or will those be shared with interested nations as well? Look at past history. NASA went to the moon. They brought back several kilos of moon rocks. Who owns those moon rocks? They own it. Do they share it with anybody else? They may share with certain nations, those who are their vassals. Have they shared any of that with India? I'm not sure. I don't think so. The Chinese recently went to the moon. They sent a Chang'e rover to the moon. I think they brought back some samples, or they may be in the process of bringing back samples. Those are exclusively Chinese. So, which nations have the right to mine lunar minerals and materials and metals? Those who can reach there. Yeah, no one can stop them, and they are under no obligation of share that with anybody else. That's why I keep saying India needs to ensure it becomes one of the major spacefaring nations in the 21st century. Yeah, it is extremely important. It is essential that India does it. India should not be left behind in the space race. Yeah, because space is the next frontier. Space is, like they say in Star Trek, the final frontier. All right, let's take a couple more questions. Kailash Parvat, Rudrajit says, my goodness, how many questions by Rudrajit? Uh, Kailash Parvat, the land of Lord Shiva and one of the holiest places for all dharmic paths, is currently occupied by China. Is it not shameful? It is unacceptable, and this situation will be rectified not far from today. It has to be rectified. It does not belong in anyone's hands except those who respect dharmic culture. Tibet is fine, but not China. Mazhar says, how to handle failure. I attempted a civil services exam similar to UPSC a couple of months ago. The results came out a few days ago, and I just couldn't make it by a small margin. Any advice? See, take a look at the people you admire the most successful people in the world. I can guarantee you that the people who are now considered to be the most successful people in the world have failed more times than any average person. You cannot succeed without learning from failure, but only if you can learn from failure constructively. So, how to handle failure? Take it, first of all, take it as a learning experience. Secondly, you should not have only one option in life. You place all your eggs in one basket. If it doesn't work, you're doomed. It should not be like that. You should have multiple backup options. Let's say your UPSC was plan A. You should also have plan B, plan C, plan D. And in the long run, in the long run, life is long. Life is really long. You Because of today's advances in medical technology and all that, most people, I think, now can expect to live 100 years if they are reasonably lucky and if they take good care of themselves. So let's say you fail at something in your 20s, it should not dishearten or discourage you. There is a lot more you can do in your life. You have a long life ahead of you. So always have multiple options, multiple plans. Always know, you have to first understand yourself and what you are best at, what you will be good at in life. Have a 10-year objective, break it up into 5-year objectives and a 1-year objective. And whatever your 1-year objective is, you should have quarterly objectives also, and you should have multiple goals, not just one goal. If you fail at one thing, learn from it, but don't be discouraged, and that should not be the end of everything. You should always have backup plans. So that's how you handle failure. Failure is an opportunity to learn. You should analyze why whatever happened. Why did it happen? What were the steps you took that could have contributed to your whatever you call failing? Yeah. So that's what you do. So always have multiple backup plans, always have a big goal, and if it doesn't work this way, we will do it that way. That's how we do it. So be positive, understand you've got a long life, learn from the best people that you admire. I can guarantee each of them failed more times than most people will ever fail in one life. That's how it goes. So it's all about learning and always keep on advancing and always have multiple plans. That's what you do. All the best, sir. All the best. um Mingu says, I want to know how your brain stores so many facts and information. Any secrets? And please do more science podcasts. I don't know. I just have access to one brain, and it is the way it is. I don't know whether I don't think I memorize lots of stuff. What I see is patterns, and you can only see patterns if you go through a lot of information. So you got to read a lot. I read. You can watch podcasts. You can learn in any way you want. I don't think I store lots of facts and information. Oh, I only store what I find interesting, and that's what I talk about. I don't talk about things I don't find interesting. So I don't know. I don't know what secrets are there. For me, there's no secret. I'm just who I am. I've always been this way. I don't think I am great at memorizing stuff. I forget lots of things. I have to Google it, specific names and dates and all that. I forget that all the time. But I overall understand the big picture. So that's how it works for me. Please do more science podcasts. I think this year I'm going to do way more science podcasts this year, starting the coming week itself. Yeah. This may be the year of science on this channel. Of course, other things as well, but I'm going to reorient my focus more towards science to some extent this year. Yeah. Shri Balram Putin says, is human body symmetrical? My right hand is slightly bigger than the left one. uh, Listen, no human right versus left. So listen, no human body is perfectly symmetrical. Okay, if a body is perfectly symmetrical, it's unnerving to see that. It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in nature. Right hand, right foot, left foot, whatever else, right, left. You're always going to have some asymmetry, even in the human face. Yeah. So don't worry if your one hand is bigger, one is smaller. It's perfectly natural. You can never have perfect symmetry anywhere. Ronald Rajmanyu says, where did the Sakas and Scythians go? Where did you take them? Please give them back before the date of 3rd January. The Scythians are in my custody and they are not going anywhere. Is what it is. Okay, let's briefly take some questions from the live chat. Briefly, 5 minutes. Do we have any questions from the live chat? Um, why does Sikhism have a caste system even if it was made to counter caste system? Sikhism was not made to counter any alleged caste system in Hinduism. Sikhism is very much part of Hinduism. Sikhi came out of a desire to evict the foreign occupiers of India out of India. It was a more militaristic uh, path that certain Indians took, Hindus. I don't see any difference between the real Sikhism and any other dharmic panth or path of India. Yeah, and so that's so the belief that Sikhism was made to counter the caste system is absolutely ridiculous. Sikhism or Sikhi, its sole purpose was to free India, liberate India from the foreign occupiers, the brutal barbarians who were destroying India and destroying Indian culture and committing a genocide in India. That was the only objective of Sikhi, not to reform Indian society or counter some imaginary caste system or any of that. Please understand this. Yeah. So yeah. Right. Let's see. How many failures have I had in my career? Plenty, plenty. And here I am. Everybody fails in lots of things. What's the big deal? You got to learn and you got to move on. Yeah. So most people will fail at multiple things, and it's perfectly fine. Perfectly fine. But the main thing is keep going forward, keep working hard, and stay positive. All right. What else do we have? IDK says Pakistan Taliban created another government in Pakistan. How will it affect Pakistan and India? So they've set up a parallel government, shadow government. It's going to be interesting times for Pakistan. How will it affect India? It will not affect India negatively. That's much what I'm. That's how much I can tell you. uh, Karan says, how can we say that Earth is tilted when it is in space and no base below it? It is not tilted with respect to up or down. It is tilted like this with respect to the plane of the solar system. The solar system, you can think of it as a flat disk, more or less. So if you look at the flat disk of the solar system, all the planets and objects essentially go around the sun in the same plane, more or less. You take that plane, and then you see the inclination of the rotation of the Earth. It's inclined with respect to that plane. That is what we mean when we say that the Earth is tilted. All right. Right. Anything else? Was the early Harappan civilization a contemporary of the Mahabharata era? I think there was definitely some kind of overlap between the Saraswati Sindhu phase of Indian history and the Mahabharata era. Yeah, but we don't know exactly what it was because we don't know the exact date, or even the millennium in which the Mahabharata happened. Like I said, lots of people have put up claims. I am not favoring any claim. Yeah, but I am. It's pretty much sure that the Saraswati Sindhu phase of Indian history was contemporaneous with some part of it was contemporaneous with the Mahabharata era. All right. What else? What else? What else? Ayan says, how to manage time and mobile addiction. If you have big objectives that obsess you, if you have a big 10-year goal, and you have a big 5-year goal, which is part of the 10-year goal, and if you have a big 2023 goal, and if you are really invested in that, if you're really obsessed with that, you will not have the time to look at your mobile phone and waste time here and there. You will be working towards that because it really matters to you. It means something to you, something very important to you. You need to have that. You need to have some kind of obsession in life. Without that, you're gonna waste your time. I mean, you know, I don't even have the time to watch podcasts. So you need to have something like that. Then it's not an issue. You will not even want to look at the mobile phone and scroll up like people do all the time and all that. Yeah. And time management is an art. It's something that takes time to learn. The main thing is don't have too many tasks in a day. Only have your real work is like 3-4 hours a day maximum, where you can really focus. So that is something you can split across only 1 or 2 tasks. So in a day, you should have maybe 3 main tasks, three main things you're working on, and everything else should not be given as much importance as you otherwise would. So be focused, and you need to evolve your own system of time management. Obviously, there are lots of different ways of doing it. You can read about it in various books, or see it online, various methods, various systems. There is something called time boxing. There are other things as well. So yeah, you got to find what suits you best. Everybody is different. Everybody will be able to manage time optimally in different ways. All right. What else do we have? Are Brahmins Jews, as said by something Bamsef? What? I don't know who says that, but those people need to have their heads examined, whoever it is. I don't know what Bamsef or whatever else is, but yeah. Okay, I think we are done for today. 2 hours, 10 minutes. So we're going to end the session today over here. Thank you, as always, for all the wonderful questions. Very interesting questions always that I get, some very new ones. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. And I wish you a very successful and happy 2023. And I will see you in next week's live streams. And we're going to do some podcasts as well. And we're going to focus on science a little more this year. So thank you very much. Take care. And I will see you very soon in the next live stream. Bye.